I worked so hard to create this incredible life and career, and I burnt it all to the ground. Don't believe what you see in a picture. There's so much more going on, so much more. For the first time, I was able to put into words what has been going on for the past decade. I was going to ask if I could read it.
I'd really appreciate that.
Okay.
For years, millions of people thought they knew Hayden Panettiere. They knew the blonde girl from Heroes who could heal from almost anything. They knew the fearless cheerleader who jumped from rooftops, fought villains, and somehow kept getting back up. They knew Juliette Barnes from Nashville, the beautiful country star who could walk into a room and make everyone look at her. And then, when the camera stopped rolling, they thought they knew the story too. The headlines told them. The photographs told them. The rumors told them. But Hayden's real story was something far more complicated. Because the shocking truth was not that she had secretly been living some glamorous double life. It was almost the opposite. The woman millions of people watched on television was often playing characters who were strangely close to the life she was desperately trying to hide. And years later, she would finally explain just how frightening that coincidence had become. On August 17, 2026, the world learned that Hayden Panettiere had died at only 36 years old. Her father confirmed her death, while a cause was not immediately publicly disclosed. The news stunned fans because Hayden had spent the previous years talking openly about recovery, motherhood, grief, and rebuilding her life. But perhaps the most haunting part of Hayden Panettiere's story had nothing to do with the headlines that followed her death. It was the life that existed underneath them. The life she spent years trying to explain. The life that audiences rarely saw. And the strangest part is that Hayden herself had already given us the clues. Long before Heroes made her famous, Hayden Panettiere was already working. She entered the entertainment business before she was even old enough to understand what fame meant. She was only a baby when modeling entered her life. By the time she was 11 months old, she had appeared in a commercial. By 5, she had already accumulated dozens of commercials. And by childhood, the distinction between ordinary life and show business had almost disappeared. Her mother, Leslie Vogel, was an actress herself. Her father, Alan "Skip" Panettiere, was a New York City firefighter. Hayden grew up in Palisades, New York, but the normal childhood that most children take for granted was gradually replaced by auditions, cameras, travel, scripts, and expectations. She was not simply a child who became famous, she was a child who grew up inside the machine that creates famous people, and that distinction would matter later. Because Hayden would eventually reveal that one of the hardest things about growing up wasn't becoming famous. It was figuring out who she was when nobody was telling her who she needed to be. At first, everything seemed almost perfect. She worked. She booked roles. She became recognizable, the fictional country singer at the center of Nashville. At first, Juliette looked like a typical television creation. Beautiful, ambitious, difficult, famous, vulnerable underneath the arrogance. But slowly something happened that Hayden would later describe as deeply disturbing. The fictional story started looking like her real life, and not just a little. It began to feel as though the writers were taking pieces of Hayden's private life and feeding them back to her through a television character. In interviews, Hayden said that storylines involving Juliette's alcoholism, motherhood, personal collapse, and other struggles hit painfully close to home. She described filming the series as traumatic at points and said she felt as though she was acting out her own life. Think about that. Imagine spending 12 or more hours on a television set pretending to be a woman whose life is falling apart. She appeared in One Life to Live, then Guiding Light, then films. Then came Remember the Titans. And then, in 2006, everything changed. A television series called Heroes introduced the world to Claire Bennett, a teenage cheerleader who could heal herself. A girl who looked almost indestructible, and audiences loved her. The irony was extraordinary. Hayden Panettiere became famous for playing a girl whose body could survive almost anything. But behind the scenes, Hayden was still trying to understand how much a person could actually survive. The role became so popular that the show's plans were reportedly changed around her character. Claire was supposed to be one piece of a much larger story. Instead, Hayden became one of the faces of the entire series. The world saw strength, the world saw youth, the world saw someone who could always get back up. And then Hayden moved into another role that would become even more uncomfortable. Juliette Barnes. She said she had been the kind of person who heard jump and jumped. That sentence tells you more about her life than almost any red carpet photograph ever could. Because the public saw a confident Hollywood star. But privately, Hayden was learning how difficult it could be to make decisions for herself. When she turned 18, she made one of the most important decisions of her young life. She moved out. She later explained that she knew she needed to do it for her own mental and emotional health. It was a small act of independence. But for someone who had spent almost her entire childhood inside the entertainment industry, it represented something enormous. For the first time, Hayden was trying to become Hayden. Not Claire, not Juliette, not the child actress, not the celebrity daughter, not the person other people expected her to be, just herself. And then came motherhood. In 2014, Hayden gave birth to her daughter, Kaya. But the birth was traumatic. And then realizing your own life is beginning to fall apart in some of the same ways. The audience sees acting. You see yourself. That was the hidden double life Hayden Panettiere was living. Not a secret mansion, not a secret romance, not some Hollywood conspiracy. Something much more disturbing. She was becoming famous for portraying fictional versions of struggles she was privately experiencing herself. And while millions watched Juliette Barnes lose control, Hayden was fighting battles nobody sitting at home could fully see. There was another layer to it. Hayden had become famous so young that she had spent much of her life being managed by other people. In her memoir and later interviews, she spoke about growing up in an environment where she had to learn very early how to please people and follow instructions. She later described the pressure of having people around her who had represented her since she was a teenager. She later described a life-threatening C-section in which she believed she might die. The delivery involved 7 blood transfusions and an infection. She survived. Her daughter survived. But Hayden's emotional battle was only beginning. Postpartum depression entered the picture. Then came alcohol and substance abuse. And eventually, a separation from her daughter that became one of the most painful chapters of her life. In 2018, Kaya went to live with her father, Vladimir Klitschko. The public version of that story was brutally simple. Hayden lost custody, but Hayden later insisted that the reality was more complicated than the headline. She had been struggling, she was trying to recover, and she believed that at that moment, her daughter would be safer with her father while Hayden worked on getting herself well. Years later, she would describe the experience as devastating. She talked about the pain of being a mother who could not experience ordinary daily life with her child. No school mornings, no ordinary routines, no simple moments that other parents take for granted. Instead, there was distance, there was FaceTime, and there was guilt. She later wrote about the heartbreak of trying to parent from far away. This is where the public image becomes almost impossible to reconcile. The woman who once played an invincible cheerleader was now struggling with one of the most basic human fears imaginable: the fear of losing the person you love most. And there was something else happening that made the story even more complicated. Hayden's own television character had begun to resemble her private life. The fictional woman had a troubled relationship with alcohol. Hayden had battled addiction. The fictional woman had a complicated relationship with motherhood. Hayden was living through an agonizing separation from her daughter. The fictional woman was emotionally unstable. Hayden was fighting to stabilize herself. And Hayden said the similarities were not comforting. They were painful. She felt that the writers were sometimes taking elements of what she was experiencing and turning them into entertainment. That meant that even when Hayden went to work to escape her problems, the job sometimes forced her to relive them. The camera became both her paycheck and her mirror, and that may be the most revealing secret of her entire career. The audience thought acting was the place where Hayden escaped reality. Sometimes it was the place where reality followed her. But Hayden's story did not end there. She entered treatment. She worked towards sobriety. She eventually spoke openly about addiction. She wrote about the experiences she had previously kept private. And in 2024, she published This Is Me, A Reckoning, a memoir that pulled back the curtain on parts of her life she had spent years protecting. Suddenly, the headlines weren't telling the whole story anymore. Hayden was, and the woman who emerged from those pages was far more complicated than the celebrity people thought they knew. She was a child star who never had the luxury of being anonymous, a daughter navigating a complicated family dynamic, a mother living with the pain of separation, a woman recovering from addiction, a survivor of traumatic experiences, a grieving sister, and an actress who sometimes found herself playing fictional versions of her own pain. Then came another devastating loss. Her younger brother, Jansen Panettiere, died in 2023 at only 28. His death devastated Hayden. She spoke about losing him as losing part of herself. And once again, the woman who had spent decades being watched by millions found herself dealing with a kind of grief that cameras could never capture. Yet something remarkable happened in the years that followed. Hayden began talking. Really talking, not through a character, not through a script, not through a publicist, through her own words. She began discussing recovery, motherhood, grief, mental health, the entertainment industry, the experiences she believed had shaped her. She began trying to reclaim the narrative, and people who had spent years thinking they understood Hayden Panettiere suddenly realized something. They had been watching the wrong person. They had been watching the actress. Hayden wanted them to meet the human being. That distinction matters, because when a celebrity has been famous since childhood, the public often believes it owns a piece of their story. We see the photographs, we see the interviews, we see the characters, we see the mistakes, and eventually we convince ourselves we know the person. Hayden's life was a reminder that we almost never do. There was a private Hayden who could be frightened, a private Hayden who could be exhausted, and she had to learn, slowly, that surviving isn't the same thing as pretending nothing happened. That lesson became central to the woman she was becoming. And then, on August 17th, 2026, that story ended far sooner than anyone expected. Hayden Panettiere was 36. Her death was confirmed by her father. The cause of death had not been publicly disclosed at the time of the initial reports. And already, the internet began doing what it always does when a famous person dies suddenly. People began guessing, speculating, filling in the blanks. Some remembered her addiction, others remembered her depression, others remembered her abusive relationship, others remembered the death of her brother. But speculation is not the truth. And perhaps the final lesson of Hayden Panettiere's story is that we should resist the temptation to invent an explanation for a life we never actually lived. Hayden spent years fighting against other people's versions of her. A private Hayden who could be grieving, a private Hayden who could be trying to stay sober, a private Hayden who desperately loved her daughter, and there was another Hayden who walked onto television sets and performed strength for millions of people. The most shocking part is that those two women were the same person. That was her double life, not a secret she invented. A split between the woman America expected to see and the woman struggling to survive when the cameras were gone. And perhaps the strangest irony of all is that Hayden's most famous character may have been the closest metaphor for her real life. Claire Bennett could heal. She could be hurt. She could fall. She could get back up. Again and again and again. Hayden could not heal that way. She could not simply reset after every trauma. She had to live with what happened. She had to carry it. She had to recover from it. She knew what it felt like to have strangers decide who she was. She knew what it felt like to watch headlines become more important than reality. And near the end of her life, she had finally started telling her own story. That is why the secret behind Hayden Panettiere's double life isn't some hidden affair. It isn't a mysterious Hollywood conspiracy. It isn't a secret identity. It is something much more human. For years, the world thought Hayden Panettiere was playing strong women because she was naturally fearless. But perhaps the truth was more complicated. She played strong women because she knew exactly what it felt like to be afraid. She played survivors because she understood survival. She played women who fell apart because she knew what it meant to put yourself back together. And when the cameras went off, the woman behind those characters was fighting her own battles. The public saw Claire Bennett. The public saw Juliette Barnes. The public saw Hayden Panettiere. But none of them were the whole woman. The real Hayden was somewhere between all three. a child who became famous before she understood fame, an actress who became successful before she understood herself, a mother who loved her daughter while struggling with the reality of separation, a woman who battled addiction and fought for sobriety, a sister who endured an unimaginable loss, and finally, a person who began telling the world, "This is me." Not the character, not the headline, not the rumor, me. And maybe that is the most heartbreaking part of the story. Hayden spent so much of her life being watched, but being watched is not the same thing as being known. Millions of people knew her face, millions knew her characters, millions knew her name, but the woman underneath the spotlight was always more complicated than the image. And perhaps, in the end, that was the secret she spent her final years trying to reveal. She wasn't the invincible girl from Heroes. She wasn't the troubled country star from Nashville. She wasn't the headlines. She was Hayden, a woman who had been famous almost her entire life, who carried wounds the cameras couldn't see, who made mistakes, who survived things, who loved fiercely, who lost people she couldn't replace, and who kept trying to become herself after spending decades being everyone else. The world thought it had been watching her life, but for years it had only been watching the performance. And now, perhaps for the first time, people are finally beginning to understand the woman behind it.